Pose 322. Study Session 12. West African Source. Leopold Sedar Senghor. Introduction. In this lecture and the next, I'll examine aspects of the contributions of two West African writers to African poetical thoughts. This lecture focuses specifically on the writings of Leopold Sedar Senghor, former president of Senegal, while the next focuses on Amilcar Cabral, leader of the armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism in Portuguese Guinea, now Guinea-Bissau, killed by parcel bomb in the early 1970s, shortly before that territory gained independence. Learning outcomes. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to discuss the issues and themes in the writings of Senghor, discuss the contributions of the writer under consideration of African political thoughts. Leopold Sedar Senghor. Two areas in which Senghor had made contributions to African political thoughts relate to his elaboration of the concepts of negritude and African socialism. Now let us look at these in turn. Negritude. As indicated earlier in Lecture 9, Senghor had emerged as a leading exponent of negritude. Negritude was a reaction to what educated black Africans living and studying in France during the colonial period perceived as an attempt by France to deny Africans their cultural heritage and impose French culture on them. Senghor was one of those Africans who saw in negritude a cultural and political instrument for the assertion of African self against attempts to deny such an essence. For more details on Senghor's contributions to negritude, please read relevant aspects of Lecture 9 and consult items on the reading list for that lecture and this lecture. African socialism. As will be clear to you shortly, Senghor based his espousal of African socialism on two major lines of argument, the negative and the positive. On the negative side, he condemns both capitalism, which he considers materialistic and outdated, and Marxism, which he describes as atheistic and doctrinaire. On the positive side, what he fails to see in these two items he then identifies with what he calls an African mode of socialism. According to him, capitalism works only for the well-being of a minority, and whenever state intervention and working class pressure have forced it to reform itself, it has considered only the minimum standard of living, when only the maximum would do. He goes on to add that capitalism holds out no prospect for a fuller being beyond material well-being. That is why, according to him, under the capitalist system, the political, cultural, and spiritual liberties, which are so often quoted, are enjoyed only in theory on the surface. They are not lived. In talking about his conversion to African socialism, he argues that it is because private capitalism finds it repugnant, or more precisely, finds it impossible to transcend its material bounds. It is because of its transformation into colonialist imperialism that were converted, after much hesitation, to socialism. He similarly condemns the prevailing communism of the Soviet Union, which he calls Marxian humanism. Writing in the 1960s, he praised Marxism for its economic and sociological analysis of mid-19th century. He noted, however, that such analysis did not go far enough, and that in stressing materialism and determinism, the Marxism of Karl Marx had underemphasized the freedom of man, accusing Marxism of what he calls dehumanized humanism and deterministic subjectivism. He then warns that in theory, one betrays Marx by using Marxian dialectic as it stands, without changing anything, for this is reasoning twice in abstraction, the surest way to miss reality. We must not tire of repeating dialectical materialism is born of history and geography. It was born in the 19th century in the Western Europe, conceived in that milieu. It was essentially designed to analyze and transform it. And what of Asian or African realities? West African realities are those of underdeveloped countries, peasant countries here, cattle countries, their once feudalistic but traditionally classless and with no wage earning sector. They are community countries where the group holds priority over the individual. They are especially religious countries, unselfish countries where money is not king. Though dialectical materialism can help in analyzing our societies, it cannot fully interpret them. We should betray Marx by applying his method like a veneer to West African realities. Having condemned both capitalism and Marxism as being irrelevant to the African reality, he then begins his analysis of the essence of his proposed African socialism by justifying how this perception takes care of the peculiarities of the African man without necessarily overlooking the universality of unqualified socialism. As he puts it, man is not without a country, nor is he without a color or a history, a fatherland or a civilization. On his concept of the African mode of socialism, he argues that negritude is traditionally socialist in character and that our Negro African society is a classless society, which is not the same as saying that it has no hierarchy or division of labor. It is a community-based society in which the hierarchy and therefore power is founded on spiritual and democratic values, on the law of primogeniture and election, in which decisions of all kinds are deliberated in a palaver after the ancestral gods have been consulted, in which work is shared out among the sexes and among techno-professional groups based on religion. A community-based society, communal not collectivistic. Thus, in working out our African mode of socialism, the problem is not how to put an end to the exploitation of man by his fellow, but to prevent its ever happening by bringing political and economic democracy back to life. As indicated earlier in Lecture 10, much of Senghor's contribution to African socialism is often interpreted by critics as a mythical glorification of the African past. Nevertheless, you should also bear in mind his Afrocentric critique of capitalism and Marxism and his insistence that the traditional African society is a community-based, not a collectivist one. Study session summary. Senghor's more notable contributions to African political thought are in the areas of negritude and African socialism. The focus of his perspective is the proud and rich heritage of African society, based as it is on a feeling of community and a sense of history. End of study session 12. Thank you for listening.